Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to make a short contribution to this particular bill. This bill seeks to amend 6 pieces of legislation, and these 6 pieces of legislation set out the legal parameters for the functioning of police officers, prison officers, immigration officers, fire service officers, customs officers. And the new law is very much a two-way street, Madam Speaker, because by the changes it makes, it introduces new rules and stronger penalties against officers in the breach. But it also seeks to protect them from citizen aggression in the execution of their duties. And that's why I said it was a two-way street, because the bill does take into account the general lawlessness that has come to characterize the society in which we live and which seems to be a growing phenomenon, not just here but elsewhere. And the lawlessness comes, on the one hand, from rogue and undesirable elements that exist in institutions that are meant to be institutions of law enforcement. And the member for W, Mira mentioned it in passing. But it also has to do, this general lawlessness, with disrespect for law and for the enforcement of law by citizens of society who often indicate by their behavior that they would rather not be circumscribed in any way whatsoever. Now, the bill consists of 7 clauses. It was first introduced in the House on June the 7th, 2019, and we are debating it now 5 months or so later, so that there can be no legitimate claim of urgency for the bill. But we in the opposition do appreciate the value of the measures in the bill. Now, I want to focus here because it is an important part of the bill. I want to focus on immigration and customs, because we often deal with the police. I might mention something, but I wouldn't really deal with it. My colleague from Naparima addressed the issue of prisons. The minister addressed the issue of the connected currents of the bill for all disciplines of law enforcement included in this bill. And I want to deal with the amendments to the Immigration Act and also to the Customs Act, Madam Speaker. This bill increases the penalties for making or issuing any false documents, certificates, or declarations. And this, in the particular case, I'm talking here of immigration officers. And it also addresses the issue of accepting any bribe or other remuneration or benefit. So in the case of customs officers, in the case of immigration officers, as it does for the other categories in the bill, fire officers, police, prisons, customs, etc., it addresses very frontally corruption issues. The fines and the jail terms are now much steeper, depending on whether it is a summary conviction or an indictable conviction. And these fines can range from $250,000 to $500,000. And on conviction, a person can be jailed for 10 to 15 years. So in this bill, therefore, the immigration officer, and I'm dealing with the immigration officer here, it is also true for the other categories of officers. But in this particular bill, the immigration officer is being held to account. And this is in keeping with what the Minister of National Security said in his opening. I think he said that this bill was to hold officers up to a higher standard, as well as to protect officers of law enforcement. But the bill also targets any citizen who will, and I quote from the bill, who willfully assaults, threatens, obstructs, resists, or interferes with an immigration officer. And this is also so for the other officers in the performance of his duties under this act or the regulations. Now here, the immigration officer is protected from the citizen, or I suspect an immigrant who might have the opportunity to interface with him or her, and who in any way, that's to say the immigrant or the citizen, wishes to prevent him from doing his work, Madam Speaker. In the instance of the immigration officer, but also for all other categories of officers covered by the bill, the issue of tipping off becomes a crime that is introduced in this bill for the first time. And tipping off, of course, I mean, I don't know what is the legal arrangement, but I understand it to be giving someone information that might interfere with the process of investigation or the course of administration of justice. So we also have, in addition to that, we have the issue of resistance to immigration officers, that is to say by the citizen or the immigrant, and the threat of violence to their families if you are dissatisfied or angry or whatever it is. Now, these fines and jail terms for accepting a bribe, there are also fines and jail terms for accepting a bribe and for abusing office. We have no problems whatsoever, Madam Speaker, with keeping immigration officers honest, nor do we have a problem with increasing the penalties for dishonesty. The same fines and jail terms, pretty high, apply for impersonating an immigration officer. Now, the way this is put in the legislation is a little awkward to my view, because this could only be targeting, this could not possibly be targeting immigration officers or police or firemen or prison officers. It would have to be targeting citizens who seek to impersonate an immigration officer, as I'm dealing with that, or a policeman or whatever. And so it is meant to protect the genuine immigration officer and therefore the genuine policeman or the genuine prison officer against abuse of the use of the uniform, either by being stolen and so on. Now, the minister, when he spoke, talked about the rental of uniforms and as well as the rental of guns, and that might be a possibility. But I do think that what the target is in this is against a citizen who might choose to use a uniform in order to commit a crime of some kind. Now, I want to also raise a couple of issues with the Customs Act, which is amended here, similar to what is mentioned here in immigration. In amending the Customs Act, again, the issue addressed is how to protect the officer from assault or interference with his work or her work, protect him from action against relatives by citizens who may feel aggrieved. Again, you're protecting the family, as in the case of police prisoners, prison officers. the issue of tipping off, giving information that you shouldn't, and protecting the officer in the conduct of his or her duties. Now, I'm addressing the issue of immigration officers and customs officers, not only because they appear in the bill, but because I want to make the case, as the bill actually does, that they are not, make the case because in including them in this way, I want to make the case that they are not just law enforcement officers, but they represent these two, customs and immigration. They represent, Madam Speaker, border security for our island country. Now, while the police is involved in keeping the peace and maintaining law and order on land, and we thank them for their service to the country, while the fire service prevents and outs fires across the land, and we also thank them for their service to the country. And while prison officers address the incarcerated population and seek to manage them, contain them, isolate them from the rest of the population, and rehabilitate some of them, and we again thank them for their service to the country, the immigration officers protect Trinidad and Tobago from those coming from other countries who enter this country. They keep tabs on the entry and exit of our own citizens leaving and returning to the country. They manage the legitimate entry and exit of visiting travelers, tourists, we might call them, while they also are responsible and accountable for illegal immigrants in our country. That is to say, they have the capacity to chase them, to find them, etc., as the case might be. The Immigration Division also renews passports and they issue passports to citizens. Now, we take the issue of a passport for granted, but this is a very, very important document. Not only is it an identification, an identity document, it is really, a passport is a freedom document. It gives you the opportunity to move in the world as a citizen of the world temporarily, knowing that you are rooted in a particular country. And therefore, this is a very, very serious responsibility and obligation that should not be treated lightly. And they also detain, that is to say, immigration officers, illegal immigrants. Sometimes they legitimize their stay or make arrangements for deportation after a hearing, as the case might be. They handle cases of asylum seekers and refugees. And with the recent and ongoing crisis in Venezuela and the large increase in the number of Venezuelans in our country, the jurisdictional reach and responsibilities of the Immigration Department have become clearer, and our own country's reliance, heavy reliance, on immigration as a major source of border control has intensified. So immigration and immigration officers are very important, and they are very critical to the sovereignty and the national security of the country. And I want to emphasize that fact because they really do guard the borders. They guard the borders. Customs officers have a correspondingly connected role. And I want to emphasize that. They guard the borders. And they are very, very important again, I want to emphasize. Now, immigration and the immigration officers and the department, they are very important also for something else that we sometimes overlook. which is that they are important for statistical purposes. This is the agency, immigration officers and the immigration department, that should provide statistical data on non-nationals residing in our country to the Central Statistical Office. Recently, and for growing in importance, I think over the last decade, two decades, we have understood not just the importance of statistics, but the Central Statistical Office and the National Statistical System. But the Immigration Department is a collector and collator of statistics, and the CSO or any national institution for statistics depends on them and would depend on them for accurate information. And this role in statistics, Madam Speaker, is critical for establishing the makeup of residents in our country and the number of citizens and non-citizens and their status residing in the country. It is the most important basic information about a country. How many people you have, how many are citizens, how many are not, and where do the non-citizens come from, and what is their status in your country. It is one of the most critical pieces of information in the management of a nation. So accuracy of information is essential for managing any situation, and population data are very, very important and vital. The Immigration Department, Madam Speaker, also collects and collates data on tourist arrivals and on tourist departures.
Madam Speaker, standing order 48-1, please.
Yes.
I allowed you some leeway because I think you were trying to ground the importance of immigration into your discussion. But it is almost 20 minutes, and therefore I think you need to quickly tie up what you're doing with the bill, okay? Because I have to uphold that objection on relevance. Okay? Please proceed.
I really have to find my center, because I don't think so at all. I was making the point that this is an important institution that basically guards the boundaries of this country. And I was going to make the point, Madam Speaker, that with all of this critical role, I mean, how could we legislate for an institution if we do not acknowledge the critical role that it plays in the society and therefore the connectivity with other things? You know, so...
We acknowledge it. Go ahead.
Let's show a little tolerance. Member for Caroni Central. What I did is acknowledge that you've spent 20 minutes letting us appreciate the importance of immigration. What I'm saying is, I think you've reached the point where you need to ground all the, or affix all that foundation you laid to what we're doing. Okay? That's all I've said. All right? So that if you could start tying it up now, I think we'll appreciate even better what your contribution is.
But, Madam Speaker, I mean, I could take the bill and I could go through the clauses.
Please do.
I could take the bill and go through the clauses, but I was making, I hoped, a coherent argument about the role of immigration and consequently customs in a certain role in the society, and therefore the importance of this two-way street type of legislation which protects the institution as well as protects the institution from society. Madam Speaker, I will proceed. There is a clause here, 41B, Madam Speaker, which claims, or which reads, 41B1, it's on page 26 of the legislation. A person who assaults, threatens, obstructs, or resists, or aids or incites any other person to assault, threaten, obstruct, or resist an immigration officer in the execution of his duty. And it goes on to mention all the, not just the immigration officer himself, but also for purposes of subsection 2, relative means, and it mentions his parent or step-parent, his spouse, cohabitant or fiancé, his child, etc. And this is a clause that is repeated in the legislation for the protection of the officer and his family. Now, this is something that has arisen in the context of what I said before, which is to say that we've gotten to a point where there's a kind of lawlessness which has engaged both the institutions that are meant to be law enforcement, as well as the citizenry at large that conduct their business and go about their lives in the society. And I don't think we should have a situation in which the families of people who are applying the law and executing the law should be threatened in this way. So this is something that we on this side, the United National Congress, strongly support, because we feel that this protection is necessary. And the member for Dabadi O'Meara made 2 points of importance in his presentation. He said, first of all, he made a comparison between the police and the military. And he mentioned that the military engaged according to certain rules of military combat. So, and because of that, and because of the fact that those rules do not apply for police officers, he said that because the police officers do not have the comfort of those protocols, their profession is in fact a very dangerous profession. And I think we can say the same of we can say the same of prison officers and perhaps other officers as well. But he said something that was not correct. And I wouldn't do anything about it except to say that a prison system, Madam Speaker, is not a closed system. A prison system is what is known as a total institution. A total institution applies not just to a prison system, but a hospital. It applies also to a mental institution. It applies to any institution in which you have a body of people who relate in a certain way and who are cut off from the rest of the society for a certain period of time. So it is possible to think of a school, for instance, as a total institution. And the reason I say that it is not a closed system, and he used the closed system to explain the body is not a closed system, because closed systems die, open systems thrive. And the reason the body thrives is because you take in and breathe out oxygen. And the reason open systems thrive, whether they are institutions or not, and only open institutions can thrive, is because you have the flow of information in and out. A total institution, Madam Speaker, which is a concept developed by the sociologist Goffman, I forget his name, I think it was, I can't remember, I may have written it down when he was speaking. I can't remember his first name, I know it was E. But Goffman did this, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s, and he talked about a total institution. And the reason I'm raising it is because a total institution allows you to control the flow of information in and out, which is the critical point in the prison issue. And the Attorney General was correct when he said that a prison has to be a prison. It cannot be a place in which you have telephones and you are making calls outside and calling shots, and so on. And therefore, those things in the bill which seek to address those things, I find palatable and reasonable and things that are worthy of support. Irvin Goffman. Irvin Goffman was the name of the person. E-R-V-I-N-G. So, I was going on to the customs issue, and the same things that apply there apply to customs and apply to immigration. And the similarity between customs and immigration is that they also control the borders. Because when you come in, whether you bring in legitimate material, or whether you bring in guns, or whether you bring in drugs, the customs are the border patrol that allows you either to come in or to intervene to prevent you from coming in. So while immigration deals with the people, customs deal with the things. And it is important, therefore, if we understand that police are important, prison officers are important, customs officers are important, immigration officers are important, that we would try to create the conditions in which we can have a better society by lifting the standards by which they operate, by protecting them, and also by creating the conditions in the society where people would be less prone to be aggressive towards them. Now, I am still haunted, Madam Speaker, when I see a bill having to do with issues such as these and matters involving crime and criminal behavior, by the fact that we had a situation in the country 2 years ago, I raised it in the Parliament here, in which a hand grenade was found on a beach in Calibe. And since that time, and the coverage of that time, we have not found out whether the bag which had that hand grenade had other hand grenades in it. We did not find the person who had the bag of hand grenades, and we have not been able to find any of the information
Member for
related to...
Caroni Central, your original time is now spent. You have 15 more minutes
Yes.
to wrap up.
And we've not been able to connect that to anything that is happening in the society until one day something might happen or something might explode, and we may then trace it to something like that particular event in Carly Bay. And we, of course, had another incident in that very same bay in which not just a bomb was shown, that is to say a hand grenade, but lives were actually lost. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to express my unhappiness about the fact that I prepared properly to give a constructive contribution in this debate. And through various interventions, I've been thwarted in that objective. And I make that abundantly clear in my statement here today. I will ignore the comments on the other side, and I will say that this bill here is a reasonable bill for what it seeks to achieve. That is to say, to strengthen the institutions of law enforcement and to protect the institutions and the people in the institutions of law enforcement from harm, including their families. But I also want to say, like everything else, when you increase the power and authority of people with institutional power and people who have the power of law enforcement, and you increase the obligations for good behavior on the part of the citizens who must interface with these entities for law enforcement, you somehow alter the balance of the relations. And I simply want to mention that. It is an important concept because it is not like police officers have not been, allegations have not been made against police officers for abuse, or that they could not, in a circumstance in which an immigration officer or a customs officer is exercising his authority or power, or her authority or power, not be abusive to the ordinary citizen who now finds himself in a situation where if he misbehaves, if he objects, if he quarrels, he may very well find himself not only addressing the issue that he came for in the first place, but he or she may find themselves in a situation in which they now have to face a charge under this existing law. And I want to say that while it is good to increase the authority and the protection for the law enforcement entities, it is also important to understand the alteration of the balance of power between the powerful and the powerless, notwithstanding what I said about the society becoming lawless. And Madam Speaker, I want to close by saying that throughout my entire presentation here on this floor, in this instance, there has been constant chattering on the other side, and I have been subject to that abuse constantly without Speaker's intervention.
Sandy Granny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for recognizing me to take